question for you guys. Because I listen to this podcast now and then.
Good. I'm glad somebody does.
And, I've seen of late just a little bit of anger, could we say? A little bit of vitriol, a little bit of interrupting each other, a little bit of can't get a word in edgewise because somebody's filling the microphone. So
why are you looking at me?
I had a question for you.
As if you're not guilty.
Because I'm going to give you three options and let you pick a fourth. How's that? Because I don't know. So is this angst that have been evident in some recent podcasts, not the personality test, because you guys were very kind in that one. Is it your real relationship, same off camera? You guys are that vitriolic? 2, is it shtick for the podcast? People watch it, people yell at each other, so we do a little more here. Or 3, you're talking past each other to your audience instead of talking to each other. Or, since I'm a bridge builder, or number 4, you got something else there. What do you think,
want
guys?
to comment first?
Because when I'm with you personally, I don't see the same rancor I feel from the podcast when you guys.
I think every statement that you made has an element of truth to it.
What was 2?
2 was a shtick for the podcast. Creates a little tension, a little interest.
I don't think that.
Maybe not that one,
Yeah,
but
that one does not
certainly.
Bob might, and you might not.
Certainly, there is an element of rancor between us privately when we sit in a restaurant, but it's different. It's a lot less often.
When
number
we're alone together.
3, speaking to our audience, our perceived audience, I think I'm often guilty of that.
Yeah, and I'm saying this in front of Wayne, and God is my witness that that's not generally who I'm addressing. That's not who I'm thinking of at the time that I'm getting emotional or getting upset. It's my friend who I've been trying to get a certain understanding from, and I get frustrated that I feel like he's not.
And you don't feel like you're getting it?
Yeah, sometimes I feel like I'm not getting it on certain very key subjects, and it gets very frustrating because I think, how after 2 or 3 years, it's 3 years now, on some of the most controversial and most troubling issues from the Muslim perspective towards how we're perceived, can my friend be still confused about some very big issues? Now there are some other things that we have a right to have a differing opinion on, and we get a bit upset with each other. But some of those are troubling for me because I can sit with folks for an hour or 2 and be past those issues permanently. And with Bob, I don't know what it is about certain issues. We somehow either, like you said, either it is sometimes for the show, maybe from your vantage point, or that you're just playing devil's advocate because you feel like you need to for the audience to understand that, you're still going to hold my feet to the fire. But then there's this confusion as to, do you believe this or do you not believe this? Because there are people out there thinking you believe this.
Well, let me say this.
So do you need couples counseling?
Yeah.
Yeah, in a way.
So Wayne is like our therapist today.
Okay, but then there is that. Okay, what was the third one? The third one we got covered, I think, right?
Yeah, and not just your audience, but talking to your community in the audience.
Right.
So you don't want to be misunderstood by your community.
Right.
And you both have talked about there's a certain risk in your friendship being public with both
our audiences. That's true. That's true.
And are you going to? Is it?
Tell me if you think something isn't honest.
Because I think that there are times that you have gone directly playing to your audience.
Name one, because I'll tell you the one I did,
Okay,
and I told you about it, which was when we had that disagreement about your podcast and your website and what you posted. I had to go to my audience because I felt like I had a duty and obligation to fix that.
Sure.
Generally speaking, when I sit with you folks, and I remember when we had that discussion with Wayne and Chuck, and then with Wayne and you on the legal issues and whatever, I just feel like what I'm saying is fine. I know that it's okay. I know it's okay with our scholars. I know it's okay with our audience. So they're not really my focus. I'm hoping that millions watch. Great, that'd be wonderful. But I'm generally okay with what I'm saying, and so I'm not generally overly worried about are they perceiving it a certain way. Sometimes, maybe unintentionally, they're traps you set up for me, and I have to be careful how I state things. That's true. I say you don't mean to be setting up the traps, but they literally for me are traps.
I am often the spider. You are often the fly.
Okay, fair enough. But the fourth element, I'll admit where I'm guilty, is for 20 years before almost 20 years before my escapades with you, or when we really started getting together and doing our thing. I was an active caller to the faith, and I had a certain, way that I did it, and a certain mannerism and how I presented evidences and things to that effect. I am guilty that when I get into certain issues, scriptural, historical, etc., that I tend to fall back to that. That's just a natural instinct, because 2 decades of doing it is really hard in the last couple of years to weed it out.
Sure.
So we talked this out. We talked this out with Brandon in a production meeting, and I told him, I said, I'm guilty of that one thing. I really believe I'm guilty of that, and I got to change that.
And when you slip into that, do you feel like you're talking to a hostile audience? Is that kind of where the shtick comes from?
I'm the hostile person. I become the hostile person. Like it's turning it. What's been happening since post 9/11, and for me, it's been about a decade or so, maybe a dozen years, is we've gotten on the defensive because people have put us on the defensive intentionally. Okay, I've never operated well from the defensive. I'm always an offensive guy, and that's how my calling to the faith has been. That's how I dealt with every lecture, speech, etc. It didn't matter who I was negotiating with. I always went on the offensive, and so that's an instinct that I have, and I'm guilty of that. I've tried very hard to not do that, but I am guilty of that, especially the minute we break open scripture, and we discuss certain historicity. I just admitted something on air, man. Didn't I?
Listen, I'm liking it.
Okay.
This is open
we
dialogue.
did a good thing. We decided we were going to address, deal with this issue differently.
Right.
And it was because of a discussion that we had that we realized that it's counterproductive to what we're trying to do.
Cool.
And what are we trying to do?
I really do believe that we're trying to show, we're trying to change the narrative.
Right.
We're trying to elevate the discussion. We're trying to bring about, make people see the commonalities, the agreements, the similarities, the good, and that we can have differences on major issues like we've discussed, theology and religious law and prophecy, and still have mutual respect, love, and adoration.
There it is.
For each other and our families and our communities.
Yep.
And the two people sitting at this table live that. We do. We live that, honestly. And
I see you live that when I'm
we
with
do.
you, particularly away from the microphones. There are times, I was watching this one podcast the other day where you were in front of a coffee shop and you were home, I guess. You did a live video feed.
We've done that. We've thrown those out there,
Yeah,
too.
yeah, but he couldn't get a word in edgewise.
Yeah,
You
I believe
were
that.
Just
tearing off.
You were smoking mad, for one thing, and he's begging you, please, just hear me out.
Okay.
And we didn't get there.
So what I believe happens there, that maybe, I may be guilty of a lot of things, but it may be that there was something stated that I thought we were over 100 times.
Yeah, that's true.
I think what happens is I make the mistake of letting it be personal for me.
Right.
Yeah, he complimented you, and you took offense at the compliment, as I recall. And he couldn't get it. Anyway.
What happens is I think I take it personal with my friend. I think the problem is we are very close off air. We probably people notice we're close on air.
I see that, and I hear you talk about each other outside the presence of the other, and you talk about each other with incredible mutual respect. You do.
We've cried in each other's presence. We've shared things that nobody knows about us except
That's
each
true.
other. We worry about one another. I was so mad at him when he had his surgery on his neck and he didn't call me and let me help him out and bring him home and all these other things. He tries to get involved in some of the most difficult parts of my life to help out. So we have this real relationship.
I know you do.
And I think that has created the emotion. It's like the people you care about the most sometimes make you the angriest, and sometimes make you the saddest, and sometimes make you the happiest.
These are family squabbles.
It's kind of like that's probably what it is, and it's on air. And I think I'm very emotional because I represent 1% of a community that's being bashed almost on a daily basis, almost on a moment by moment basis.
I get that. I do.
And so when my friend steps in and starts to hit me on areas that he and I feel like we have an understanding on, or maybe it's going to be misperceived, or maybe folks are going to say, sometimes I do perceive, I'll admit this, are my folks, but you remember Zaki one time, one of our regular listeners, Muslim listeners, converts, got really upset with Bob. He says, saying that, you're kind of saying that he's a liar, and you're saying this, and you're saying that. Is their perception
I get it.
Emad, you're telling us, he's a great guy, he's a wonderful person, he's a sincere Christian, he walks with God and all these things, and yet here he is bringing up the same talking points Sean Hannity is. You know what I mean? And
I believe Sean Hannity's name came up in that podcast too.
did it? Okay, so we tend to do that. So we've had some that I feel ashamed about, that I feel bad, that I've said some things to my friend, and I'm sure maybe there's some times that he's told me the same thing. So I like that you started it out this way. I really do, because we have had some real serious tension. But here's the other part: we both.
And tension can be good for ratings.
Yeah.
So that's why the first one was. Maybe it's.
But beyond ratings, there's something that happened. I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag. We had a podcast that we didn't air. Okay.
I heard about this.
Yes, and
Not details.
we didn't air because of the amount of intensity that was generated in that podcast. But there's something that happened on the same podcast. Okay. Which is that, we were coming up to this, this point in this podcast, Wayne, where the volcano was going to erupt. It was going to explode. And then we took this U-turn. You recall?
I do.
And we just came right back down. And then we shook hands. And it'd be great to see the second half of that podcast, or it might even be great to see the whole thing and see one major issue. As hot as this thing got, as mean as we were to each other, and as much as we both wanted to get up and just storm out of the room, by the end of it, we were friends again, had mutual love and admiration for one another, and understanding, and Brandon joined us in that. Do you agree with that?
I do. You
have something to add to this? You've been quiet.
Well, yeah.
Please.
This has been easily top 5 most rewarding journeys of my life. Wow. Being I'm really intrigued by the way that you've done life, the honorable way that you've chosen to live.
Thank you.
And those things have drawn me to you, and so my life changed when you said yes to breakfast. It's just how it goes.
The way I said it too, right?
So I understand that there's going to be bumps in the road, because what you see as, is Bob ever going to get it, is really Bob may not be getting it.
That's right. That's what I've come to terms on.
And so, I'm just telling you, I'm not trying to parrot talking points from Sean Hannity or anything. I'm not trying to play devil's advocate. I really have serious questions about the world. And so when we have these dialogues, it's my goal is for us. And that the theme of this one today, if I had to give it a name, is a Christian and a Muslim walk into common ground.
Yeah.
And so the goal today is to find some common ground, and I like the way that our friend has come and set the table for us. I had no idea he was going to do that.
I'm very happy he did that.
Yeah.
I'm very happy he did that.
But
by the way, common ground is why we have the affinity we have for one another, the admiration and the love and the respect.
It's true.
That's the reality, because it's all the good stuff.
Yeah, and all the work I've done in common ground, I tell you, the most incredible moments to me are when people realize that I'm relating to someone out of a stereotype instead of an individual, and often a misinformed stereotype, whether it's liberal, conservative, no matter what it is, and they realize you're not the creep I thought you, plural, your community is and was. I did training for a school district, or for a university down in LA, and they would actually have education doctorate, people in their doctorate program for education. They would come together and they would kind of put them in a school board role-playing thing where they'd take the most liberal person and say, you have to represent the conservatives. And they would take a straight person, you'd have to represent the gays. And they would put people in the opposite of their community, and then they would have to get training. This is why a religious conservative thinks the way they do. And I did that training for 5 or 6 people for a couple of hours. And all of them would come out of it saying, I had no idea. This makes sense now. I don't agree with them. Doesn't change, but it gave them compassion and humanity that these people have a point of view that's come out of their story and makes sense to them. And they never thought it was true before. And I thought that was fabulous. That was a fabulous part.
I agree with that.
You've had the opportunity through an organization that you founded called Bridge Builders.
Yeah.
To walk in this common ground line of thinking for 25, 30 years? How long has it been?
I did it for about 20 or so, and then I've not been doing it for the last 8. The shack kind of overran my life, so I'm not. But now I seem to be, doors are opening back into that space, and I'm not sure how far I'm going to walk down it. I'm really not sure. I thought it'd be fun for you guys.
Well, let me add one last thing I wanted to tell Wayne because I think we've talked about some of the history that I've had, and we've probably left some out. I've also had a lot of negotiations and talks with conservative evangelicals and Orthodox Jews and whatnot, and dealings with law enforcement that tends to be pretty straight and rigid. But I also have intentionally made a lot of friends, liberal theologians and liberal clerics and liberal, rabbis. I purposefully, as I was leading a very Orthodox Muslim community, on a Friday afternoon would end up at a Dagny's, which is, if you go and see the clientele sometimes at a Dagny's, you're going to get from every walk of life, specifically a lot of those walks of life that people don't want to really talk to in those other communities. And I sit and I'll have discussions with these folks and I'll hear them out, and they give me so much perspective. They matter to me, first of all, and their perspective matters to me. And I do this. I've done this now going on, I don't know, a dozen years. And so I really appreciate what you're bringing up and what you've done formally. You can call this my informal experience. Some of it was formal and some of it was informal.
Right.
But it has helped shape my understanding and how to speak with people, how to listen to people, and it's also it's also broadened my wisdom.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
I can say this, that and there have been times where you and I have gotten very heated, but the overarching story here, if I ever felt that I was not being heard by you, I wouldn't still be spending time with you.
Right.
I would have just found a way to exit.
Right. I believe that.
So I've never felt unheard by you. I've felt spoken over, but not unheard.
That's true. I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that. Well, listen, I like when I get together with Bob.
Yeah.
I enjoy it immensely. I reached out to him from abroad. I reached out to him from right next to him. I've reached out to him on the phone. A lot of times when I really want to just be in a comfortable place, and that's saying a lot, because I have a lot of friends in this world, a lot of acquaintances.
And that's what I see. I know that's true.
Yeah.
It doesn't always convey.
Right.
And so I'm kind of curious as to how the microphone reshapes the dialogue.
I don't believe it's the microphone as much as it is the topics.
Okay.
It's the content of what we're talking about. It's the material we're covering. We diametrically are opposed on some issues. We're diametrically are opposed on some very politicized issues, some very religious issues. We come from different communities. We have a different way of looking at things, and we still put these things on the table to discuss them. And so, it's hard. It becomes a difficult discussion.
Sure.
Well,
That's
I
okay.
wanted to run past some guidelines that I used in Bridge Builders and see if they work for you. There's 8 of them.
Okay.
And I'd love to just say, does this work? Because I started in the Bridge Builder thing in public schools at a time when our society was making some huge shifts. We were basically a Christianized culture in ritual, rites of passage, curriculum in schools. And Supreme Court forced some decisions to be more open to atheists.
Now, what decade
Jews.
are we talking about here? When you started?
This was 60s, but I
60s,
started
okay.
this. Yeah, that's
No,
when
when
the
you started
culture wars, so to speak,
know that.
began.
Yeah, okay.
And very uncomfortable with a majority group giving access to minority groups in a country that they think is theirs, quote unquote.
Right.
And so I came at this at probably mid 80s, maybe early 80s, helping school districts, helping primarily the Christian audience realizing you've got to open up this culture if you're going to stay relevant.
Okay.
If you're clinging to an old, we've got to have the America, because it wasn't never a Christian America, but it was Christianized as Western Europe was. And so that was all the rites of passage. It was prayers at graduation. It was all the things that made the atheist or the Jewish person or the Muslim person feel excluded and feel like not really part of this thing. And it's been a turbulent transition. There's no doubt about it. This hasn't come easily.
Right.
So these are some of the things that I help people work through. And I just want to see if they work for you guys. Rule number 1, you can't compel people to change their worldview. Does that work for you? And that worldview includes faith, but other people have worldviews not based on faith. But you can't compel change. You can invite change.
I agree.
But you can't compel.
I can't go against something that the Quran itself declares.
Yeah.
And so, I agree. Maybe sometimes ego gets in the way. And you want to wrestle that person into submission. But no, you can't. I agree.
Compel's a strong word.
It is.
And I am probably as guilty as anyone on earth of compelling people to come and play the way that I play.
Yeah.
I do it. I'm just 100% guilty. But is it Is it possible to do it differently? Of course.
It is possible, and there's this breaking point. The way what we have from this rule one is if you believe you can't, you must compel. You've broken away from giving God His authority to work in the matter.
Yeah.
And so people do that, and to their fault, they take away something that belongs to God.
And yet, isn't so much of our governance today various interest groups getting a hold of government power to compel other citizens
Right.
to think and act the way they think
that
everybody
they
should?
should.
And that's
Yeah.
where this really becomes a problem.
Yeah. No, I think that's a
Government
good rule.
I think government's at its best when it's custodians of a common good.
Right.
Not co-opted
That's a good way to put
by
it.
5149
Yeah.
to then we're going to force our way
Yeah.
here, or in California
50.1 to 49.9.
57 to
Yeah.
33.
Exactly. And I really like there's a phrase that I like that says cooperation is always preferable to coercion.
Yeah, absolutely.
just
Well,
is.
you brought up, California is doing it from the left.
Completely.
The administration, current administration, is doing it from the far right. And both are wrong. You just can't do this. You can't
Exactly
force
right.
feed people just one way.
And that leads to the second one. No one should be asked to participate in a society that's biased against themselves.
Yeah. What do you think?
Society has not been biased for the most part against me like they have been against you. So I think you're way more equipped to answer this.
Well, we have to. I see. My difficulty in answering that is that that's kind of how I feel like I'm playing the game. And for me, it has
That what? It's biased against you?
It's
what you're saying?
well, it's biased against the image that we're supposed to be, which is an Arab, a Muslim, an immigrant, so on and so forth. And so for me, why it again becomes so personal is I didn't come over yesterday. I don't have to be here. I came here by choice. I mean, my mother stayed here by choice. My father chose to keep us here, and I choose to stay. I've been choosing to stay for decades, and I stay because I love it here. This is my home. These are my people. This is what I know. This is who I'm loyal to. This is what I've bled for and just spent so much of my time and et cetera. And then to feel like there's so much bias against us.
No, I agree that to say there isn't bias would be untrue.
Right.
The principles here, the guidelines I'm giving is this is what we've got to work toward.
Right.
We've
So I'm
gotta
saying
work
that
toward
I'd
that
love
reality.
for that not to be the case.
It's not the reality.
but it's not our reality.
And we've been dealing with all kinds of groups, not just religious groups. The GLBT communities
Right,
being a big part of that. Should we? And this started in public schools. Remember, should I send my kids to a public school that's biased against my worldview? And how can you?
So see, for me, Wayne, you might disagree with this. I don't know, but let's take three groups. African Americans, Muslims and Jews, and the LGBTQ community. Okay, I believe that this type of that number two is most oppressive to the first group, which is a group that cannot change at all how God created them.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you're antithetical to God then, okay? The second group, the Muslims and the Jews, these minorities that comprise about, 1.5% each of the American, population. We don't believe it's a choice, right? Because we believe in God we believe in our faith so strongly, let's say, but it is still a choice to be. I could wake up one morning and say, guys, I'm a Christian. Leave me alone. Don't hurt me. You know what I mean?
But law would see it as a claim of conscience, not a choice. Our religious faith isn't how we choose to act. It's what our conscience compels us to do.
Right. And so,
Yeah.
but there's this notion that Jews and Muslims both share that you can, if you're fear for your life or fear for, grave danger for your family, you can put your faith in your heart, basically, if you will. Okay. The third group, they really make, we believe for the most part, they're making a choice. I also do believe that many, are born into hormonal imbalances. Okay, so that's a little bit more nuanced discussion we can have some point.
Sure.
But so I would say that the most oppressed are those that by their color of their skin are being oppressed. Okay, and then the second is by their faith, and then the third is by their lifestyle choices, if you will. Although, like I said, I would at least preface that there are some that have, what do you call genetic
And they wouldn't call it a choice
predisposition
either. They don't call
yeah,
it a
and they wouldn't
choice
call
either.
it a choice. And that's why I said that's a more nuanced
Yeah,
discussion.
that would be
That's
a
another
blow up discussion between you
that's
and I.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, we
But I
could do that.
appreciate you not bringing it up. Usually when I read that, no one should be asked to participate in a society biased against themselves. Somebody says, well, what about the white supremacists or the Antifa group or terrorists or murderers? And it really, we're not talking about that. Those groups are fairly marginalized in the
Right.
wider culture.
Right,
Because you're talking
right.
about people that are destructive and
Right. People could
Yeah.
see. Nobody wants to really publicly say, "Oh yeah, I support that group" or something to that effect. You know,
yeah,
so
but they
we
still
understand.
have First Amendment free speech
Absolutely.
rights, so they still
Absolutely.
get that.
Absolutely.
So, number 3, making room for divergent views does not validate those views.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that.
Right.
I really do.
I'm not threatened
Right.
by, well, at least not usually,
Usually,
by
right.
someone who has a different opinion than
Right,
me.
right.
Once again, I will try to compel them
Mm-hmm,
to my side and my way of thinking. I would not really, but you and I are a good example of this.
We are.
The inclusion that we have for one another and the love that we have for one another, that is obvious.
And it's our,
I
it's our
think it's even
commonalities.
obvious.
It's our
Yeah.
our shared beliefs.
But
about
there
so
are
much in life.
fundamental
Yeah.
disagreements between you and I.
Right, but that
Yeah.
that gets to matters of salvation. That gets to matters of religious law. That gets to matters of prophecy. But are those the matters that you walk around in every day? Are those when you're working or you take care of family, or when you're dealing with your neighbors, and you're pulling the cat off the tree, or you're wiping your kid's nose, or whatever it might be, you're crying because somebody in your family has cancer or passed away or whatever? We all have the same feelings, emotions, and ways, and loves and aspirations
Yep.
and desire for things that are noble and good.
So Wayne,
we're-
are these the questions that you bring to the table in Bridge Builders when you meet with a group of people?
These are the points the training I do works toward. You've got to get people
good
to
stuff.
embrace these
Yeah.
realities.
That's good stuff.
Because most of our biases are we don't embrace, and we don't speak it. So when somebody speaks it out about no one should participate in society biased against themselves, we all agree about that for us.
Right.
But then agreeing about that for them
Yeah.
is just a huge step.
Yeah, there have been a lot of times I've said this to Bob and I've said this to other people. I've said, I know this is hard sometimes, but you have to see it from my perspective. You have to step into my shoes, or I have to step into their shoes. That's where some of this community stuff that I like to find, areas I like to find myself, because I like to step into people's shoes as much as possible. It's really hard to do that. The one time I stepped into the shoes of a refugee, a Syrian refugee in a refugee camp, it was one of those visual, one of those things you put on and you're in that
virtual
reality. And the entire time I was there, I was just bawling like a baby, and for reasons it wasn't that I was so sad for them. I was so annoyed. I was so emotional about the fact that my kids get upset because they don't have the latest game or something to that effect, and this kid's happy with a cot and a ball and a chalkboard. But read number 3 again, because I think it's really important.
Read number 3 again?
Yeah, the one you just read.
Making room for divergent views does not validate those views.
Right.
What it champions, I think, is, and we use Roger Williams for this. He's the first governor of Rhode Island.
Okay.
He was a Puritan pastor in New England, and he got kicked out because he started teaching that to make someone follow Puritan rules who've not chosen to be Puritan, he called it the rape of the soul. Mm-hmm. And that came out of, he was part of, I think it was 11 successive monarchy changes in England, where when the king changed, the religion changed from Catholic to Anglican, and people are getting killed who wouldn't make the transition. So he comes out with his whole idea of, because the point of what's beneath rule number 3 is where we do have common ground is we believe in the personal reality of conscience, the liberty of conscience.
Right.
If you can guard mine, I can guard yours. Right.
I agree.
Because our conscience may inform us differently. We may come to different conclusions about things, and we can even talk about those things if we're not compelling somebody to act the way we think they should act.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And the reason I wanted you to read that again is, Daesh or ISIS, they operate on this principle that any differing opinion must be slaughtered, literally. Yes. Yeah. We had a very firm warning and a very serious warning to the Muslim community at large from these, from the scholars of Islam, that this group is very bad. They are out there so far. This is a group that you must reject. This is a group the prophet foretold. And then we have that same problem across, the world where people are stating things or doing things that are angering Muslims. And so some of these extreme, young, maybe very zealot will go out and do something wrong. Again, we try to explain to them, they shouldn't threaten you just because they say something or believe something that's antithetical to your belief. And then I'll come back home, right? Jerry Falwell, I think it was, one time said something about the Prophet Muhammad, on his show or something. And some Pakistani Muslims went in and killed these Christians and that had been living there for God knows how long, in a church. We were so saddened and so angry that innocent Christians got killed because somebody had an antithetical view about the Prophet. Let him have that view. That's his opinion. And then for me, the pastor that was going to burn the Quran, if you remember, okay?
Yep.
And I told Muslims, I said, guys, this isn't an issue for us. When we're done with the Quran, what are the two things we do to dispose of it? We bury it or we burn it. Right. And the Quran is preserved in the heart. And so we had a move that day to open up the mosque on 9/11 while he was burning Qurans, and we said, we're going to teach them. That's it. Let him burn them all day long. So I agree with that statement, and I wish my community, the young people in my community, would take that to heart. And of course, other communities, your own, et cetera, would take that to heart.
Yeah. What I'd be interested in sometime is a discussion, because I think we come at this from two different places. Bob and I, much more from 50 years ago, the entrenched majority, people who are giving up room at the table. And people never give up room at the table easily. It has to be wrested from them. Mm-hmm. And different from people who come at the discussion happy to be at the table, feeling marginalized. The transitions in society inure to the benefit of one group and threatens like crazy the other group, and helping them. That's been the harder task. The harder task is never inviting people to the table who've never been there before. It's getting people to welcome.
But also remember this, Wayne. That's a great point. Again, when it comes to Muslims, it's far more nuanced again than that, because at times we are the marginalized and we are the minority and we are the ones just wanting a seat at the table. But you're talking about 2 billion people in the world, 57 nations that are majority Muslim. So we also have this other problem with trying to make number 3 stick in their heads and understand it's okay. We don't need an uprising. You know what I mean? I know you feel oppressed. I know you feel they're hammering you or they're saying bad things. There's a clergy here that's known that's going to be publicized can say something, and then all of a sudden you got riots in the street in Pakistan and places like that, right? Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about.
The media loves to quote
and believe it or not,
actors. Those
people now they're more the majority. You have riots in Egypt. Well, what happened to the cops in Egypt? Sorry about that. Yeah. They feel scared, because they're a minority. What happens to the Christians in Pakistan? They feel scared. And so there are times when it's the opposite. It's we're worried about our majorities.
No, but we've never lived. We've never lived in that environment. I've traveled to environments where I'm definitely a minority.
Yeah.
But I think the psychology within this culture and would be very different if Bob or I moved to a Muslim democracy.
It'd be the exact opposite.
It'd be exactly the opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
The psychology would be a bit different. But
it's
interesting to explore, because I think people approach it from different vantage points depending on that.
And that's the reason why I stuck on this topic, is it's so important on so many levels.
Yeah, and if we don't move on, we're going to be
we're going to be doing the same thing. 64.
And then I'll be part of it. And that'll be horrible. So the number, I guess we're up to 4. I'm not doing these in order. Vilifying those who disagree with you says more about you than it does about them.
Do you think I vilify you?
No, I'm not doing this for that.
No, I know. When we disagree, I want to know.
No,
I want to know.
No, I have never felt that you are vilifying me personally.
Okay. Good. I'm so happy.
But as that question or as that statement is read, I know that I'm often guilty of that.
Are you?
Yeah, I will find something, an issue that I feel strongly about that I disagree with, and I will find the person who's the key spokesman for that position, and it's on like Donkey Kong.
Right. I can't. At least I hope I never vilify anyone who diametrically is opposed to my views, but is sincere about it. Is telling the truth. Yeah. Is being honest. Okay.
And I think this speaks to people who try to make points for their point of view by vilifying people on the other side. Right. I heard a survivor from Westboro Baptist, the GodHatesFags.com bunch. Yeah. a survivor from that 5-year-old girl on those picket lines. Now she's older. She said in a TED Talk yesterday, I heard it. She said, "I thought my rightness justified my rudeness." Not an ugly statement.
Yeah,
Good, insightful. Yeah.
very insightful.
And then rule number 5, which I think you guys will like. I think this begins to move towards some of the how do we fix this. You best protect your civic freedoms by protecting those of people who disagree with you.
That's great. Yeah,
That's the truth.
That's the truth. Absolutely.
And we don't have enough of that in the
Yeah,
culture.
yeah. I
We
think
don't
we
have
need to do
enough
that, yeah.
of. I got a phone call the other day who heard some of the podcasts I did after I got back from Dallas and Arnita, and it was from a lady of color who'd been in a meeting I'd done in South Carolina a few weeks before, and she said, "You don't know what it does to me to hear white men talk the way you are about our needs." We saw that with Arnita.
We did.
It's one thing when she makes the point. It's a different thing when we make the point to our community that they most want made.
Well,
And it seems like they're the only ones screaming about it.
The Birmingham jail letter that Martin Luther King wrote when he was going there expecting to meet with some white Christian leaders to further the cause, and instead he's put in jail. He writes this wonderful letter where he says the enemy is not the Klan. The enemy of, and using terms from the 60s, the enemy of the Negro is not the Klan or the white supremacists. It's the Christian pastor, the white Christian pastor, who in private supports us, but in public says nothing.
Yeah.
So by their silence, they're complicit.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's keep trucking because it's getting late. I don't even know how long we've been at this.
Oh, we're good. We're good.
Okay. Let's go with rule number 6. If you do not include all the stakeholders, you cannot fix the problem.
I agree with that too. I don't have any problem. I wanted to make a statement about Rule 5.
Go ahead.
Just to say that just to give it so much validity. Harvard Law School posted a verse from the Quran that they consider to be one of the most just verses of all time, and it speaks exactly to that, which is to say that you must be just. And always be just, whether it's your mothers or your fathers, et cetera, or your friends or your neighbors or whatever, and or if you dislike a person or hate them, you must still act justly and treat people justly and enact justice. So for us, that's just one of the most relevant matters, and it really does speak to these values that we hold and we say we believe in our Constitution and our nation. And we're failing right now. I believe we're failing in that area.
I think we are in a huge way.
In a huge way.
And without people being educated. Again, all the media tends toward conflict, tends toward vilification, tends toward upping the ante on the conflict in our culture.
Right.
There's a lot of people fighting for this side of it.
Right.
They just don't have the same megaphone that
Agreed.
vitriol people have.
On your last question to that one, though, when we live in a democratic society where 51-49 wins, then there's 49 people that really did not achieve the outcome that they wanted to see. And so there's always going to be, in a democracy, right? There's always going to be those who feel marginalized, whether it's a 1% or an 8% or a 49%.
But generally, they've got representation across the board. So you have this compromise, these negotiations that we've had throughout throughout our history, and where you're
used to.
That's right, up until now.
Now we stonewall.
I think the second Bush administration did a lot of this, where they really barely won, but they wanted to ramp through all their issues, right? And they did it with a little more politely, I guess, than what we're seeing now. This situation here is just unheard of for this democracy. I mean, it's as if the other 50% of America, or 51 or 52, whatever you want to call it, simply don't exist, or just sit down and shut up. We're going to do everything our way, And you're right. It's not supposed. I don't believe it was the way that the founders put this whole thing together. I don't believe it was supposed to be that way. I believe it was going to be all these checks and balances.
I'm a fan of one man, one voice. I really am. It's why I've never been a fan of the Electoral College, ever. And I still don't understand.
But even
you mean one woman, one vote too?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. One man,
one
woman,
human.
There you go.
One human,
one vote. What that we are all equal. In
But
our
I'm saying that even with the Electoral College, there's
Electoral. It's not
sorry,
electric.
it is
That's
electoral
that's a
college,
parade
yeah.
in Disneyland.
That's true. With free press. With
Wait. Let's,
all right, go ahead. Let's say it again.
Let's,
The
let's, have,
electoral
let's
college.
have a moment of just we need to
Stupidity.
get the frivolity out. Go ahead.
We need transition music. Go ahead.
Free press. You know, the judiciary branch. You know,
Right.
the Congress having representatives, the governorships. You know, state legislator. There's so much checks and balances in our nation that all sides should always be considered. You know, or would have a voice.
Sure.
But we're right now trying to just move them all aside, have one voice, and just do it one way.
Which is why you were talking the other day about
Yeah.
the Iranian thing and or not even that, but just the Iran agreement, where Trump unilaterally steps out of it to great confusion all over the world because of that agreement. But part of it's because Obama never submitted it to Congress, so it was really an agreement with the president, with Obama, not the United States.
Yeah, right. And
then
other
it's easy
nations.
to undo.
Right.
This stuff's really hurting us. And
It is, but don't leave out the fact that Congress at the time was unwilling to really
Wouldn't
sit
have.
and they wouldn't discuss it.
But you got to hold their feet to the fire.
Right, well, and then they also brought Netanyahu to do a one-off, something that no other leader had ever done. Right, address both houses of Congress. You know, the dual chamber.
Yep.
And so I think we're just in unprecedented times.
We are.
I like Wayne and I have had discussions over the last few weeks about the difference between the words compromise and consensus, and I like the way that you say it, because I just happen to just say compromise has become a dirty word, and I think that to achieve anything, there has to be an element of compromise.
Without
and
doubt. In a democracy, you have to have
yes,
some
but here
compromise.
comes Wayne with what did you say, Wayne?
I don't remember exactly what I said in that conversation, but compromise to me is always we're going to trade off till we get to something we can barely tolerate. And I think consensus is
That's one way to put it.
what's the highest possible agreement we can get to? Well, and if we're respecting differences, I mean, a true democracy, according to Benjamin Franklin, is two wolves and a sheep going out to lunch, voting on what they're going to do for lunch.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so that's why they
I
wanted.
didn't know that. That's
pretty
That's
good.
why they
That's
wanted a
good.
democratic republic. We want
Yeah.
to protect the minorities with the law.
Yeah, the sheep.
And then and I think our governance has lost that. We're happy with 51-49 or 5-4 Supreme Court decision. I think the Supreme Court, if it really functioned well, would always press 7-2 to 8-1.
Oh my
Let's
God.
find the language.
Give me a fist bump.
That
because
can
I've
get
been
enough people
complaining
to
about
support
that
it. Yeah.
since when they decided the Bush Al Gore issue,
Gore v.
right?
Bush, yeah.
I said you can't have it this way. If they're true to the law, it cannot be 5-4, 5 conservatives, 4 liberals. It cannot be that way.
No, it shows how
They should-
politicized that the Supreme Court has become.
these are the times when the court is politicized,
Yep.
and it isn't acting honorably. It's not really and it's the proof is in the pudding. You know,
And consensus, what it really challenges is not, I'm going to get my way versus your way. It's, can we come up with a third option
Right, that
that
makes
honors you and honors
Yes,
me?
yes.
To me, that's the greater work of a democracy, and no one's doing that these
And
days.
I would add one more,
And that's bridge building.
right. But I would also add one more. Look, it's true. When someone wins an election, we do have a leader for 4 or 8 years, okay?
Yeah.
And we like to blame him. We like to give him credit or her credit. And we like to blame him or her,
Yeah, we
right?
do. Yeah.
So there has to be some measure of this is his policy, right? And some certain elements of his policy really have to go through the same way when they control Congress, one party or another. They have to have some ability to try out their policies. But I think, yes, they can't be extreme. They need to be, they need to compromise. It needs to be a consensus. You need to bring all the others on board and say, look, we are in charge, and we want some of our ways that we want to show the people that they're going to work, or they might fail, and we'll take credit or blame.
And what
But
we're
at the
seeing
same time,
now-
we'll take into consideration that we can't just do a clean sweep.
Yeah,
you
what we're
know?
seeing now is if you don't build consensus, then it won't last. As soon as your leader changes, then he writes off all the same things you wrote in.
Right.
And Trump seems bent on that right now to dismantle everything Obama-ish. And
It appears
it
that
leads to
way, and I
lousy
think,
governance. Yeah,
it really does. And if I can just throw in one last religious point, we have this teaching, which again, my community and our nation would be served well if they were to follow this, which is that we don't follow any one opinion, even from a known world scholar. If his opinion differs from the consensus, we follow the consensus opinion. Okay, that is what the Prophet Muhammad taught us. That is what God teaches us in the Quran, and that is what we're told that will not lead you astray. So you never, because the one man can err. One man or one woman can err, but the consensus we say cannot err. Okay.
So if everyone's jumping off a cliff, you're going to jump off a cliff.
It's something like that, but no,
Okay,
just the opposite.
Yeah, no, consensus says that we're at our best when we're taking in all points
That's
of
my
view.
point.
Yeah.
Let's say we have 12 or 50 recognized world scholars. We call them ulama. If 49 are in consensus on an issue and then one strays, we're not told to go to the one just because he happens to be our teacher or he's the same ethnicity or comes from our nation or something like that. Go with the 49. You're always going to be better off that way.
Sure. Well, two more quick. One we've already covered, but cooperation cannot require compromise of our deepest convictions.
Right.
These are mostly claims of conscience issues, not spending issues. There's not really claims of conscience.
And I feel we do. On this show, I believe we definitely honor that.
I think so.
believe we do, yeah.
And the last one we've already talked, best solutions arise from seeking highest possible consensus instead of lowest common denominator compromise.
And
that's why I always
and
freak
you can
about compromise.
Go make a comment on this first, because I'm going to make my comment on that one. Go ahead.
Well, no, I've already made my comment.
Okay. I think that it looks to people, again, the shiny object we're arguing about takes away from so much that we agree on.
Exactly.
And we agree on much. I think we should talk a whole lot more about what we agree on, right? I had a statement one time in public, and I know you and me talked about it in private, but I said, if you were to go to Japan or China or India or Indonesia or Africa or America, and you get a group of just average people, and you ask them, listen, guys, I want to ask you a question. Do you like the adulterer, or do you like the man that is honorable to his wife? Do you like the man that steals, cheats, robs, and kills? Do you like the man that is honest and doesn't cheat and doesn't rob and doesn't kill? The liar or the man who tells the truth, and so on and so forth. Any group of people anywhere in the world is always going to side with the honorable.
Sure.
And that's it. That's it in a nutshell. It doesn't matter. We can continue on down the honorable qualities and the dishonorable qualities. And most majorities, all majorities, are always at least going to say, because in their heart, no, of course the man that's there or the woman that's this way, right? That in itself eliminates this reality that we incline towards evil as human beings in a majority. We incline
And
towards
yet, here we are.
because people
Right.
are talked to. We have two elements that are at play. We have the Satan, who is him and his army are at work constantly, and we have people who listen to those things and become, in a sense, his warriors, and for their own profit, for their own gain, for their own power, whatever it might be that they're wanting, predatory desires. They will change people and encourage people to be bad. And so you have these forces coming at humankind. If you let them to their, if it was their good nature, the majority's good nature, they're always going to incline towards biblical issues that are taught in the Bible, or Quranic issues that are taught, or Buddhist issues, or Hindu issues. If you go into these faiths and you ask about noble ways, they don't say, yes, be an adulterer, kill, steal, cheat, lie, etc.
No,
None of them do. It's just crazy.
You can't build a society on
You
it.
cannot. I mean, if you go into the samurai traditions, it's courage, it's honor, it's bravery, it's honesty, it's decency, it's all these wonderful qualities, it's hard work, and so on and so forth.
You remind me of a Muslim samurai.
Yeah, I'd love to be a Muslim samurai. I have a samurai sword,
I bet you do.
but I do. I do. I swear to God, I can cut myself
I
with it.
bet you do.
I
think I've been on the other end of it once or twice.
Get out of here. You guys want to laugh?
Only the symbolic one. not
I
the
was
real
in an emergency room one time, and I was in that emergency room called The Last Samurai. I swear to God. I had a samurai sword at home, and I was messing around with it, and it was a real one, and it fell out of its sheath, and it just sliced my leg.
My.
So I was
Well,
called. It was
I'm
a joke.
glad
it
it
was
sliced your leg, and
it was the joke of the emergency room
that
that
is
night.
good.
The Last
That's
Samurai.
awesome.
Yeah,
The
it was
places
funny.
it
I
could
wish
have
I'd been
gone.
there. That'd been fun.
Yeah, you would have laughed.
What a,
Well, I think we covered some ground.
We did.
hopefully
Do you,
common ground.
Do you have any closing thoughts, Wayne?
No, I knew this is what doesn't surprise me at common ground work. I didn't think any of you would have trouble with any of these 8 things. Most reasonable people sit down and say, no, I'd love to live in a country like this.
That's just good stuff.
And
That's-
yet we
yeah.
keep giving a country like that, which is not always divided by political points of view. It's the money behind those
Right.
It's
political
the
points
greed.
of view.
It's
The
the
greed
that are
is
looking
it.
for favors from government. And that's why, one of the things George Washington said, what I think is brilliant, he said, I'm afraid that democracy asks more of humanity than humanity has to give.
Oh man.
Because if we had a smaller government where the money we're arguing about is thousands of dollars, it would be very different than when we're talking billions of dollars and the industries it either benefits or punishes. And that's why we have most of the bad law we have, is because some commercial interest has pushed for what they say is a great solution for the American people, but it's just hype for their own benefit. And we need legislators and representatives who will stand up to that. Instead, they feed on it.
Well, when they don't, then the great argument of the 20th century between the communists and the capitalists, was that capitalism is all about greed, et cetera, and it corrupts and so on. That we allow that argument to win, you know, instead of being, yes, capitalism is good, but it must be honorable.
Yes,
it must have all its checks and balances. It must be regulated. It must be good.
And hopefully the electorate is ready for something different. That's what I hope.
We hope that they are, but at this point in time, the truth has a price tag. And those who are dispensing the truth have a profit motive.
Yeah.
And so as long as that becomes the reality, I really like
we'll put truth in quotes, right?
Yes. There was a former general, 4-star general who ran the National Security Administration and was also the head of the CIA. I saw him on Bill Maher a couple of weeks ago. Okay. And he said this really could be simpler than we know. He said there is so much real fake news because of the profit and loss statements. He said there really is a lot of fake news. He said if we did the news the way that we do movies and television with Rotten Tomatoes and got a consensus, well, that piece of news you just heard got a 72% true. Or that piece of news you got, and it's from all sources.
There's a website doing that.
Yeah.
TheKnifemedia.com.
Is it? Is
a
it?
Knife, like a kitchen knife.
Yeah, just
TheKnifemedia.com. It rates, it'll give the New York Times an 11% integrity rating on a story.
Well, there it is.
And they've got these and it's not just another group doing their bias. Fox will get a 26% on the same story. And they give you the raw data. What is the data behind the story and how has it been interpreted for you instead of you getting the data and you get to interpret it? Right. So it's something I've gotten. I met with the one of the key guys with it last time I was in New York. He wanted to meet with me. So yeah, I'm excited. I think they're doing some good work. I don't know. It's pretty new, so you get to see all that's there. But
I like it.
Yeah,
I like it.
We're checking
guys, Wayne, thank you for making the trek here today.
Always my pleasure.
We appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure to see you. It's always a pleasure to get your insight and get grilled by you today.
And Emad, always a pleasure.
First time I've grilled you.
Yeah, it was a good grilling, though. It was a nice grilling. It wasn't what we do to each other, so it was really good having you, Wayne, honestly.
Great. Thank you.
Well, until the next time.
Adios, amigos.
See ya.
All right.